Well, hey, Internet students, Dr. Z here for another exciting episode. This one, we're going to be turning on the electricity and, of course, wiring up the place to allow that to happen. Tools and supplies is going to be hammer, cordless screw gun, electrical tool belt with ample supplies. Again, that tool belt is different from your carpentry tool belt, has different tools in there. Level, drill bits, screwdriver bit set, staples, wire strippers, needle-nosed pliers, dikes, assorted electrical tape, wire nuts, 12-2 wire, 12-3 wire, electrical conduit, wire molding, assorted plugs, switches, fixtures, junction boxes, panel boxes, correct amperage breakers, and electrical diagram, which you're going to develop during this lesson. The student should understand by the end of the lesson to design the entire electrical system for your off-grid retreat on however you want to wire up your place. The assignment is to obtain a photocopy of your certified blueprint of all your floors and then mark that up with your electrical boxes, your switches, your plugs, your light outlets, appliances for your kitchen, fans, any type of accessory that you may have in your off-grid retreat will need to have electrical power to it. So that's something that you're going to have to design and develop. And then you're going to go ahead and pull out a code book from your state, and you're going to read through the electrical code book and understand what the electrical code looks like. Warning, unless you are a licensed electrician or electrical engineer, you will not be doing this lesson physically, but only in theory and on paper. Full disclaimer here, the reason why I was able to wire up my own home and install my own solar panels, which will be in the next lesson, is I am an electrical engineer with a bachelor's degree of science in electrical engineering. I'm not a practicing electrical engineer, but I do have an electrical engineering degree. I was able to wire up my entire home, calculate all the loads, and also obtain the city inspection and sign off after my work was done. Again, I am not responsible for your stupidity. This is going to be in theory, Internet students. Step 1, planning the milestone. All right, so this is a significant milestone to check off your overall project plan. Let's face it, students, if you've got electricity, you've got the plan pretty much down at this point. So you can start plugging in your television, your battery chargers, even some of your power saws and things like that can be used off your solar panels. Be sure to have a satisfactory diagram prior to your electrician coming on site to do the work. Of course, it'll all start with making a phone call, but knowing the appliances, the gadgets, and the electrical components for your off-grid retreat will aid immensely in the electrician's work when he starts installing all of the outlets and fixtures that are needed. So let there be light, Genesis 1:13 in Scripture. I think we've all read the Bible. I've actually read the Bible 5 times, and every time I find new things, and I will always find new things in the Bible, God's Word never returns void. The assignment will be to draw up a schematic of your electrical design on your blueprint paper, and then I don't need it to be turned in to me, but that's something that you're going to hold to yourself. Remember OPSEC, a military term for operational security. If you look at my drawing here, I'll show you what I did. I put boxes and switches and plugs and circles for light fixtures and dark line runs for circuits, the circuit breaker panel boxes. Remember, each room has a different run of circuit for the circuit box. That's all you probably need to know to get started. Your electrician will take you through the rest. Now let's talk wire. Code says that 14 gauge wire is sufficient for bedrooms, 12 gauge wire is sufficient for bathrooms, garages, and kitchens. Now for electrical ranges and electrical dryers, you need to look up and see what gauge that they need. It could be 10 gauge wire, it could be 8 gauge, it could be 6 gauge. You need to understand what it's asking for. And of course, you need to understand the difference between 220 volts and 110 volts. And I'll let you students look that up for homework. So for the sake of a log home, remember that I didn't have the luxury of putting wire through sheetrock walls like in a regular home. I would have to drill through many logs stacked already to do that. So I had used wire mold on the outside of the logs for outside switches and plugs, but on the interior walls, I was able to go through the studs like a normal household wiring professional job would look like. Remember, that 12 gauge wire holds a 20 amp breaker, and 14 gauge wire holds what breaker? That's right, 15 amp breaker. I went with the bigger wire throughout the entire log home. Everything is 12 gauge or lower. Remember, the lower the gauge, the bigger the wire, the more amps it can hold, the less fires it will start. Hint, hint. Now let's talk panel boxes. They sell panel boxes at 100 amps, 150 amps, 200 amps, and even larger for regular sized homes. I chose the 200 amp panel box due to my load calculations and number of fixtures supporting throughout my project. I have an electrical spreadsheet at the university website, and you can actually download it. Please don't forget to give us a small donation. You can use that as a template to figure up your loads and also what kind of appliances and items that you have in your house. And this may be a fun project to do with your wife and kids. You can figure out who's using what in the house, who's using hair dryers, who's using the television, who's using the curling iron and things like that, who's washing clothes 4 times a day. All of this stuff would be very handy to know. There's an online calculator out there on internet sites as well, but you can also use the spreadsheet to figure that all out. So once you understand the gauge wires and the size of the breakers that you're going to need per circuit, that will deduce the panel box, and your plugs and switches will be laid out on your diagram as well, and where you're placing fixtures. So that would be something your electrician would sit down with you and talk about as well. So here you want to watch online videos on the internet. There's an old adage, you don't know what you don't know, and that's a fact, by the way. So get out there and start watching videos. At least get yourself familiar enough with electrical appliances, gadgets, and electricity in general, and understand what you're going to need to purchase in the future. And also, it helps you with a budget as you get started here. In general, you want to purchase, panel box breakers, connectors, 500 feet of 12 2-gauge wire, 50 feet of 12 3-wire, which is for 3-way switches, assorted nail-in boxes, face plates, switches, 2-way, 3-way, and 4-way switches, junction boxes, staples, wire nuts, and all the electrical fixtures such as fans, lights, smoke detectors, carbon dioxide monitors, rheostats, cameras, motion detectors, and any type of security that you may have in the house. Step 2, you're going to be nailing in electrical boxes. Of course, your electrician will do this. First, you're going to want to start in one room. Let's select, for instance, the master bedroom, and nail into the stud. Place boxes about 14 inches from the OSB subfloor. And except, in areas like kitchen countertops and bathrooms, you don't need to have the plugs that close to the floor. You can have them up above the counters. And in garages as well, you can have them on your workbenches. Once the entire home has plug boxes completed, the electrician will nail in the stud for the boxes for switches, which will be about 48 inches on center from the OSB subfloor. Be sure to take into account double, triple, and even quadruple boxes when needed. Remember, students, that if you have 2 switches on the wall, it's going to have a double box. If you have Sometimes you have a GFI with two separate plugs on the side, like in the kitchen where I have it. That's going to be a three configuration box, and then you may even have four switches in a box. You know, if you're out near the vestibule or something, and you got light switches outside and inside that have to be flipped. So be mindful of all of that when you start nailing in boxes. Also, if you purchase the electrical equipment prior to your electrician coming out, he may use it and not charge you his rate, which is probably the same price that you purchased at the home and garden store with his markup on it. Or maybe he goes to an electrical contracting company and has a discount, but he'll still mark it up somewhat, usually. The next step is nailing all the circular boxes for your light fixtures. This would include any lights that are going to be installed, such as recessed lighting, chandeliers, and ceiling fans. If you have anything else special in the room, I say like a jacuzzi, sauna, which will need ample power, then you'll also need to nail in an outlet box where the power is going to be harnessed from the wall outlet. So plan ahead and really think this through on your wiring diagram. Step 3, drilling holes. This was always fun, by the way. It's kind of relaxing. You can just put on some Christian music and just drill away. I had a 1 foot drill bit, and it could go through studs and also floor joists and everything to get down to the crawl space to run to the circuit box. So you're ready to drill holes. Plenty of drilling is coming up, and most likely the better part of the day. So I use my electrical drill generator and not my cordless drill. So grab your electrical bit and your 1/2 inch wide bit, and then if you need to run 2 or 3 or 4 wires, you might want to use a 1 inch wide drill bit that can make a much wider hole. You're going to drill holes between the studs about 2 feet above every plug box and keep the holes in a straight line. You need to pick a place to run a circuit line to the panel box downstairs. This requires drilling a hole through the base plate of your stud right through to the basement. This only has to be done once, as it represents one circuit breaker. Each room typically is one circuit breaker. The other things, even appliances, like a dishwasher is one circuit breaker, a washer is one circuit breaker, a dryer is one circuit breaker. Your range is typically 2 circuit breakers, by the way, but I don't want to get into that just yet. It's because it requires 220 volts, but we'll talk more about that later. So essentially, if you plan on having a ceiling in your basement, it's best to drill through the floor joists in your basement to hide the wires up into the joists. You may want to use a 1.5 inch bit, as you can run trunk lines of wire, usually up to 6 per hole, and then you can have 6 separate circuits run to your panel box. So if your students are going to have a ceiling that's going to be tacked up onto your floor joists in your basement, you don't want to run the wires along the bottom of the floor joists and just staple them up. You're going to want to drill through the floor joist, which is legal. It's all code. And you're going to run the wires, your circuits, through those holes, and that way it hides it from the ceiling, and your ceiling can be nailed up to the floor joists. Otherwise, your ceiling can't be nailed on top of wires that are stapled to floor joists. That's illegal, by the way. Step 4, wiring the home. Pull out your roll of 12 2-gauge wire. You're going to want to run 1 feet from your panel box in the basement all the way to the hole that you just drilled, to the bottom plate of your framed wall. You're going to stick the wire out, go upstairs and pull the wire through. Usually run it to the first plug in the room. That's what I recommend. You can run it to a switch, it doesn't matter. But you're going to have to wire the entire room off that one plug. So I say plug because you got more space to work off of. So you're going to have to snap the plastic knob off the back of the plug box, which you just nailed, usually about 18 inches from the floor, and run your wire through that hole, leaving a good 6 to 8 inches extra hanging outside of the electrical box that you nailed in. This is so that you can go back through and install the plug and switches later. So that's something that we'll do later. Remember that it's the first plug and it's going to power the entire room. So you need to wire all the plugs in the room from this one plug. So you're going to run pigtail wires from that one plug to all the plugs, and then you're going to have to pigtail it to the switch for your lights in the room. Usually there's one light in the room, so let's just go with that theory for now. You got one light to wire, so you're going to wire from that one plug that's been powered. You're going to run a feed to your switch, and then you're going to have to understand that you need a power feed. I show you how to do this, but typically the bottom of the switch is where the feed comes in of power. The top of the switch is where it's switched on and off, and it goes to the light. And then your neutrals are going to be tied together with a wire nut behind the switch. But make sure you understand that. Your electrician will do that for you, but it's good to know how to do that. So you're going to pull out 12-3 wire if you have a three-way switch, 12-2 wire for two-way switches. Then you also have to staple everything to the studs on the walls, typically 6 inches from every box. And then anytime you have to cut over and go through another stud, you have to staple at that point where it actually bends at a 90 degrees. That's also code as well. Step 5, wiring plugs. When you wire the plugs, you want to wire grounding wire first, which is the copper bare wire. The reason for this is because that'll take all the brunt of the electricity if there was a short in the appliance. Then you're going to wire the neutral side of the plug, which is the white wire. And then that goes on the light colored screw. There's a light colored screw on the plug on the left side, typically, unless you got the plug upside down. So be careful. Then you will want to wire the hot side, which is the black wire, and that goes to the dark colored screw. And make sure, students, on your plugs, you know how you have, I call them the two eyes in the nose. Well, you got two eyes that are like straight up and down, and then the nose is like the round one. The round is the grounding wire. Make sure that's underneath the two eyes when you install the plug. And then that means that your hot will be on the left eye, and your neutral is on the right eye, and then your grounding is on the nose, if that makes sense. Step 6, wiring switches. For switches, you'll want to connect the grounding wire first, which is the bare wire once again. But first you'll have to connect 2 bare wires together with a third 6-inch piece of bare wire that you would cut off from an unused piece of 12-2 wire that you already have laying around the house. The reason for this is because the switch and the light and the power grounding wire all have to be connected. So that's a 3-way connection right there. The same thing goes with the neutrals. All 3 will be connected once again and pushed back behind the switch box, because you have to make room for the switch. Then you're going to hook up the hots, which I just talked about. Usually the bottom one is where the feed comes in from the breaker. It's your power. The upper one is from your light, which is when the switch is turned on. It's going to be given to power, and then the light will come on. Make sure, students, that when you install switches, that when you pull down on the switch, it should say off. There's a little off text in a little dimple above the switch, and you can see that. If it says on, flip the switch around, turn it around 180 degrees, and install it that way. Because when the switch is down, you want the light off. When the switch is up, you want it on. Nothing that annoys me more when I go in somebody's house and I flip the switch down thinking the light's going to go off, and the lights turn on. And, they need to rotate the switch around 180 degrees to fix that. So consult your owner's manual on how to wire fans or lights or chandeliers, and all these things are special from the home and garden store. Even electrical gadgets and things like that, you may put in dehumidifiers, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, things like that, carbon monoxide alarms. So make sure you understand how all that is wired up. So once the room is done, right? Remember you ran one feed from the panel box off of one breaker. The next room has to be done. That's going to be another breaker, and then the next room and the next room. And again, make sure your electrician is aware of what's going on. If you have huge rooms, like a great room or something, and you may have a bar, a jacuzzi and things, you may have 3 to 5 different circuit breakers going on, so you need to understand the loads of these breakers. Remember that a 20 amp breaker is for 12 gauge wire, a 15 amp breaker is for 14 gauge. Step 7, go outside and install your electrical fixtures. You may need to purchase a small chainsaw to cut holes in the logs from the outside to install electrical switches and electrical plugs and lights. Once this is done, you're going to have to drill holes from the back side of the log straight through into the opposite room, like I did, by the way. Start drilling where the outside plug is located. I recommend coming through from the basement through the log into the cut portion of the log for the electrical box position. In other words, you can go through the floor joist and into the log itself if you're way on the edge of your basement ceiling, and you can drill right through the log itself. Now comes the fun part. Insert your boxes from your plugs, switches, and light fixtures. You can screw through the back into your logs and make sure that the wire hangs out 6 inches like I said before, so that you can wire them up easy. And you can actually wire your plug, switches, and fixtures at this point. Be sure that your electrical boxes are waterproof since this is outside. Do not forget that you need a long run of wire that goes back to your circuit panel box in the basement, and this will be your outside circuit breaker. Now, a couple things here is, when running feeds from your panel box, I would use a black magic marker and label each of the wires that go in, so you understand it's outside, it's your range, it's the kitchen, it's bedroom number 1, things like that. It's your jet pump for the well. That way, when you go back through, you're going to have to label your panel box when all your circuit breakers are installed, and it makes life a lot easier. Tip number 2, students, if you have a log home like I do, they sell small chainsaws that will actually cut through the logs for electrical boxes. This is really handy and really nifty, because that way you're not cutting through the entire width of the log. You're just cutting the dimensions out for the actual electrical box, and that makes life a lot easier when you do this. And then also, when you install your metallic box, they sell this electrical, it's kind of like silly putty, if you remember playing with that as a child. You can actually roll that up, it's like clay, and put that all around the electrical box, between the box itself and the crack that's there, and the log. And that way it totally seals it off from water, and it's legal, by the way, and will pass inspection. So ask your electrician about that. Okay, step 8, basement electrical now. Now that you've got your main home wired and your outside electricity done, it's time to complete the basement. You're going to nail in junction boxes into the floor joists. These are used to connect any circuits together to make one circuit run to the panel box. So in other words, if you have 2 or 3 wires that came down like I had for my kitchen, I had to wire them all into one junction box, and then I had one feed go off to the actual circuit panel box and create one circuit. Again, these junction boxes are nailed to the floor joists. And then in the basement, you want ancillary circuits. You need one for the washer, one for the dryer, one for the jet pump. Of course, one for lights. If you have different lights, plugs, things of that nature, you want to make sure those are wired up as well into a separate circuit. Step 9, panel box wiring. I'll go to the corner of the basement where you'll see an array of, number 12 wires dangling down to the floor. You will secure a piece of OSB plywood to the wall and secure the 4 corners of the panel box in this case a 200 amp panel box, to the OSB, which is secured to the wall. It's best when you're running circuits that you leave about 4 times the length because you might need to wrap it around the inside of the panel box of these wires. So make sure you leave about 4 times the length when you cut them. You need to punch out the top and the sides of the panel boxes where you want the individual circuit runs to enter. Insert the panel box connectors first before you insert the wire into the panel box. You must strip down the wires from the plastic coating which runs through the studs. Now you should see a black wire, white wire, and bare wire if it's 12-2 wire. If it's 12-3 wire, you'll see a black wire, bare wire, white wire, and a red wire. Both black and red are hot wires. Your bare wire will go to the bus bar in your panel box, which is actually your grounding wire, which takes the brunt of an electrical shock should there be a short in an appliance. Your white wire is the neutral wire. It goes to the opposite bar in the panel box. However, your bare bus bar and your neutral bus bar will actually go to the same grounding rod outside, but it's imperative that they go to separate bus bars in your panel box. Make sure you understand that. And your black wire will be wired to your circuit breaker, which you will install as you go down the list and snap them in one at a time. Repeat this process for all the circuits in your house. Now go outside and pound in your ground rods into the ground. You'll also use number 4 gauge wire to ground your panel box, which will ground your entire house. Essentially, both your bare wires and white wires will go to that grounding rod. Remember that you must have at least 25 ohms of resistance when this is all done that goes out to your grounding rods. If you do not see 25 ohms of resistance, please call an electrician. Again, if you're going to have an electrician do this, so you don't have to worry about that. Step 10, review testing. Be sure that everything is wired correctly and that you have the proper ohms of resistance going to ground. And this is done with an ohm meter. You must have also a volt amp meter as well. The next step is going to be hooking up the generator for testing loads. You will wire the generator up to the neutral side of the panel box and also the positive bus. You will have 2 positive buses, one for 110 and the other is also a 110 volt, and which would combine to make 220 volts for your appliances that need those, like an electric range or electric dryer, things like that. But first you want your generator to be grounded properly. Refer to the owner's manual to demonstrate how to ground the generator into the bus bar and make sure everything is a complete circuit. Now you are ready to fire up the generator, so start it up and warm it up. Now go downstairs into your basement for where all your circuit breakers should be in the off position and wired. I would throw the main breaker first after you test that the generator has 110 volts on one of your bus bars. Once that bar has 110 volts, it'll be on one side of your circuit panel box for your breakers. You can throw all the breakers one at a time and test the switches and the circuits in the house. I went ahead and did that. And then I actually turned off the generator and switched it to the other 110 lag, which in a house you have 2-phase electricity, which is you have 2 separate 110 volt lags that come in. So I had to switch the 110 volts from the generator over to the second lag, which is the next column of your circuit breakers. And then I went ahead and fired up the generator again and put 110 volts onto that bar and went ahead and turned each circuit breaker on one at a time and then tested all the fixtures and all of the plugs that was correlated to that circuit breaker. That's how I knew that the house was wired correctly and that I was ready for solar panel hookup. Again, you're not going to do this. This is just ancillary information that I'm giving the students on how I ensured that my house was wired properly and also that every switch, socket, light, and fan was working. because I didn't want to get solar panels installed, which is the next step, if there was going to be circuits blown and things popping all over the place. I wanted to make sure the entire house was 100% successfully electrical worthy before that solar panel installation started. So that's how I did it. And then I had the inspector come in and validate everything and also get a full sign off on this. It also looks good, a sign off for your real estate agent should you happen to sell, but I'm not going to sell this place. This is definitely something I'm keeping, right on through the apocalypse, as you know. So, of course, I'm being facetious, right on through to the end of my life, of course. This is a beautiful place to live. So anyways, in closing, be sure to click the thumbs up button below and like this video and subscribe to our channel by clicking that subscribe button right next to it. And then if you can, please help our ratings, by doing both of those steps. And then if you feel led to, donate a $5 tax-deductible donation to our website, www.university1310.org. And currently all of our resources are free. Our bachelor's degree in homesteading, master's degree in legal defense, and then we also have a PhD program in political activism as well for conservatives. But wishing your project well and Godspeed. And please, once again, get an electrician to do this. Students, your job in this video is just to write up a electrical plan and calculate some loads off these internet websites that show you how to do that. And that's it. So I'm not responsible for anybody's stupidity or anybody's mishaps or even death. I expect you to have an electrical a professional do this work for you. Okay, Godspeed, and we'll see you in the next video.